Welcome to Health Oddity, the show that strips away the jargon and hype surrounding all things health and fitness to help you live a long, strong and energetic life. Lining up at the bar this week, here's Peter Ladd and James St. Pierre.
Hello and welcome to the Health Oddity podcast, episode 305. And we are joined today by a very special guest all the way from Canada, from Colombia, going to get that wrong, from Victoria, which is the capital, I believe, of British Columbia, and on Vancouver Island. And just before we came on, I'm just going to stand again. I'm wearing a Tofino Brewing Company jumper because Steph and I went on honeymoon out in Vancouver, Canada, the Pacific Northwest. Pete's already said he spends time out there, or spent time out there as well.
I used to in a previous life.
Okay. So yeah, we are joined, and we're going to have a very different conversation today with Thomas Attig. How are you doing, Thomas?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Excellent. Now, we obviously on this podcast, we've been recording and releasing a weekly podcast for nearly 6 years now, every single Friday. And I can say that we have never discussed the topic that we're going to discuss today. So it's going to be lovely to talk about something very different. Although the topic of the conversation might sound, it doesn't sound too uplifting, but it's a kind of a, yeah, he's putting his thumbs up. It is okay, but it is something that every single person listening will deal with at some stage in their life, probably has dealt with at some stage of their life. And as we briefly spoke before we pressed record, health and wellness is an all-encompassing. I can't remember one of the recent guests we had on. Obviously, we spend a lot of time talking about physical health, but sort of mental, emotional health as well is so important. And we're going to today be talking about grief. Now, Thomas is a professor. He's a philosopher. He's a kind of a revolutionary voice in grief studies, and is the author of maybe of more books. But the 3 books that I've seen that he's the author of is How We Grieve, The Heart of Grief, and Seeking Wisdom in Death's Shadows. So, he's got BA, he's a PhD, sounds like a huge amount of time studying grief. So, I mean, Thomas, to begin with, maybe can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what sort of drew you to this path, to this kind of calling, working around grief? It's a bit of a big question, I know, sorry.
No, it's not hard. I've been doing a few podcasts, so I'll try to keep it succinct. I was born into 2 large families. My father was one of 10, and my mother was one of 9. My dad was 18 years older than my mother, so his family had some elders older than he was, who started getting ill and dying when I was just a little kid. And at the time, people didn't have the luxury of traveling long distances easily. So typically, if a family lived far away, my mother's family lived in the Chicago area, as did I, so I knew them a lot. But my dad's was spread all over the Midwest out to the West Coast. And if someone became ill or died, there were letters that kept coming back and forth. And when a letter would come announcing that a cousin or maybe even an uncle had died, my mother would take that letter, and I had a brother, so there were 4 of us all together, and she would open the letter, and rather than just sharing it with Dad, even if it was about his relatives and so on, she would read the letter to the whole family. And I remember the first reading when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and several before I became a teenager. And some of them were quite detailed, and they talked about the how of what had happened and what people had witnessed and how people had spent time with them in their illnesses or recovering from injuries that they didn't quite make it, and so on. and she pulled no punches. So she just read them out. And my impression as a young boy was, this is what people do in families. And people are dying in large numbers all over the place. This is just usual, but it was quite unusual. I found that out later. I remember talking to an editor when I was writing my first book-length treatment of grief and loss about life in her family. She said she wasn't to her first funeral until she was in her 20s. And nobody of significance in her much smaller families had died. So I view that in retrospect as a kind of a privilege of getting to know things on the darker side that most people don't have early exposure to. And it made me calmer and more comfortable. I never thought there was going to do anything professionally having to do with death and dying, but this was a setup. And by the time I was a teenager, I loved being with other people. And I loved the large family gatherings on my mother's side. And while some of my teenage cousins were out playing and being jocks, and I was no jock, Attigs, we had a kind of a pride in finishing last in whatever we entered into, and so on. So I like to sit around at family gatherings and listen to the men for a while and listen to my teen peers, and especially listen to the women in the kitchens and dining rooms as things were being prepared and cleaned up. And I became good at listening. And my peers thought I was a pretty good listener. And when things were going hard for them as teenagers, and sometimes people dying, they were comfortable talking with me. So that was another setup. I went to the university, and I was convinced I was going to be a mathematician. I got perfect scores on SAT tests and things like that. And I wanted to be a teacher. I'd always wanted to be teachers. The people I loved the most were my teachers. My best teachers were really good at what they did. And I thought, this is a nice thing to do. And my older brother, 9 years older, became a teacher before I did, went off to university and so on before I did. And I aspired to be a teacher as he was and as my best teachers were. I gave up on studying mathematics. I looked at what it was like to teach math, and I wondered to myself out loud and in my heart of hearts, do I really want to teach trigonometry to sweaty teenagers who have no interest in it whatsoever? And we can't have any conversations. All right. I thought, no, this is not what my teaching should be about. And I decided the humanities looked good. My brother was a history teacher. So I was very strategic in my sophomore year at the university. I decided to take nothing but humanities. And I signed up for philosophy, literature, and history. And I vowed I'll take a whole year. And what I like the most, I hope I'm as good as I want to be at that. I'll major in it. And philosophy won the day. Literature, I had to read too much. I was a slow reader. And the historians just wanted who died when, who was king when, what did this pope say to this king and prince and so on. I thought, that's not history. I want history that I can talk about, and if not, they're not going to be teaching that. And philosophy was new to me, but I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with phenomenology, which is a study with philosophical skills where you learn to describe and interpret the broad range of human experiences, which turned out to include grieving and dying. And I fell in love with existentialism, which is a school of philosophers that devote themselves to questioning, wondering about, reflecting on how to live a meaningful life that ends in death, a finite life, meaningfully and with integrity. This is summarizing stuff that on the page can sometimes be pretty ugly to look at, and you got to find your way through it, but that's what it's all about. And I thought, well, I'll be done teaching pretty soon. I got a job at Bowling Green State University in Ohio for my first full-time job. And I started teaching what I was trained to teach and some ethics courses. And after about 3 years, some of my colleagues for a couple of years had already started teaching things about applications of philosophy, like philosophy of law, medical ethics, philosophy in the environment, business ethics, and so on. That's questionable. Well, never mind. We won't talk about business ethics. Political political thought and so on. Well, you have to wonder if there is any, but anyway. So I was teaching there for a couple of years, and the university established a new college of health and human services. And they taught nursing, gerontology, social work, child and family development, and other things. And I'd been teaching my ethics students and others for some time. And I noticed that a lot of the students, I gave them choices about what topics they wanted to think about. And they almost invariably picked a topic or two that had to do with death and dying. So they were picking my future for me. I thought they could use a course on death and dying in these schools or programs. I proposed it. They said, yeah, go ahead. When I actually faced the prospect of students coming into classes, I thought, they don't need so much of the ethics stuff. They are people who are not as well acquainted as I am with death and dying, grief and loss. I'm comfortable with that. They're going to have a hard time going into a room where someone is dying, or there's a family where people are grieving. I've got to help them think about their own experiences or lack of experiences and help them get comfortable with meeting people who are having some of the hardest times of their lives. So I began to ask them to regularly throughout the course reflect on their own experiences of one sort or another having to do with death and dying. And one of the experiences I asked them to write on was in an exercise where I asked them to describe what it was like at the beginning, in the worst of it, and coming out of their loss experiences. Write about your 3 most important loss experiences. And after reading a few hundred of those in a couple of years' time teaching the course, I noticed some things about what they were describing. And they weren't describing what some of the books about grief and loss were saying. At the time, there was a woman named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross who had written a book called On Death and Dying, and she described 5 stages of dying. Pretty good descriptions, pretty good listener to the people she was talking to. Somehow, in the winds, that description of 5 stages of dying became 5 stages of grieving. There's no such thing. We'll talk about that in more detail. It fits with dying because in situations where people are told that they're dying or where they suspect that they're dying, there's a lot of uncertainty. Is the doc got it right? Are they wrong on reading the tests? Are they really misdiagnosing? Am I in the hands of good people who understand and make accurate predictions of what's happening to me? And where you've got that kind of open-endedness and uncertainty, there's room for denial and there's room for trying to fight it and so on. And if someone has died in your life, there's not a lot of room to deny that it's happened. You have a body in a hospital room or in a funeral home and so on. So I began noticing what my students wrote about, and it was entirely different. Not one of them ever mentioned a stage of grieving. They talked about, boy, is the world different now, and I'm really hurting. And what do I do practically with the stuff that's been left behind? Or how do I interact socially with my grandmother, whose son just died, who happened to be my father? I'm hurting, she's hurting, we see this. How do I talk with her? I've never had to talk to grandma in circumstances like this. They've been telling me some things in church. Um, the way that guy behaved at the funeral, where he was nothing but positive about the glory that my relative is going to, tells me he doesn't understand grieving very much, because I'm sitting here hurting and this whole room is sitting here hurting, and he's not talking about hurting. He's talking about some message he has to give to us, and so on. I'm not sure I want to go to church anymore. As I walk around my neighborhood, there are places I really don't want to go by because they remind me of the person who died. Um, my mother wound up in really bad financial shape here with dad dying, and he didn't really train her in how to take care of the money. And it turns out we're losing his salary, but we're also losing his guidance in figuring out how to do things with the money. Things like that just multiplied and multiplied. And I remember this one I'll never forget. This one fellow, young teenager, he must have been about 20 in his maybe sophomore year in college. He said, I remember a couple of years ago, I went into the living room in my home, and my father had a gun in his hand and he was contemplating suicide. And one of my vivid experiences was having to wrestle the gun out of my father's hand to keep him alive. The world changes, and different things, you confront different things uniquely in your own life circumstances, and so on. I fed back to them some ideas, and I started writing essays. And one of the early ones was around the idea of grieving, not as just an emotional roller coaster, but as a process of relearning how to live in a world that has changed profoundly. I said, does this make sense to you? That's exactly it, Professor. None of our writings are talking about it this way, but you're making sense. Well, those books that you mentioned earlier, they're all about relearning the world, including you guys are in for health and positivity and affirming life and so on. I'll give you the short thing, and then you're gonna want to talk about these, I think. The culture says too often to people that grief is only the bad stuff that flows over you, the sorrow that comes into your heart, the confusion, the paralysis, because it's such a big change, I don't know where to begin or how to do it. And half the world wants to be quiet because they're afraid of making me sad, but that leaves me lonely, and I don't want to be lonely. How do we talk to one another, and so on? It's this huge thing that has hit me, and it feels like the world's caving in on me. And the culture emphasizes all of the what happens to you, your passivity, what you can't do, where you're helpless, where you're powerless, where you don't have any choice. And the culture spends a lot of time encouraging you to gut it out, be patient, or spew your emotions all over the place, and just get it out, and it'll go away, it'll be over, and then you can be what you've always been. And that's a bad message. And in psychology, they contrast reactions and responses. And reactions are how you are affected by, diminished by, hurt by, how you are passive in loss experiences, how you're helpless, you're powerless. Nothing you can do, just let it hit you and let it hit you until it stops hitting and pray that it stops hitting and so on. And a good part of what I contributed strongly to in thinking about grief and loss is how, as with other experiences, they're a blend of reaction, what happens to us, and response, what we do to or in response to what's happened to us. And relearning the world is the agenda that you have to work on. And you have lots of choices in how you reshape your daily life, how you reconceive the next chapters that you're going to be entering into without a person who had a prominent role on the scene, and make it more positive still. The heart of grief, on my view, there's a whole second book about this, is learning to love in separation. We're actually relearning to love in separation because most of the time we're separated from the people we love. I don't think either one of you asked everybody you know and love to come into the studio with you today so we could have this conversation. You left them behind. They didn't stop loving you and you didn't stop loving them. So every day, most of the time, the people that we love in separation. What requires their physical presence, we can't do anymore, but everything else we can. All right. And that's positive. And that's something that, given the way you do your podcast and so on, you should encourage people to look into materials that remind people of how the most important things you do with the people that you love, most of them you do with them in some other room or in some other place. It would be an odd world. I used to do a little kind of short story imagining for students. Imagine if everybody had to have with them all the people that they love and who love them in turn, wherever they go. We'd have small clusters of people going to gas stations to fill up, going to grocery stores to pick up food and water. You couldn't have a really big family because, and you can't make very many friends either because you just can't have them all with you all the time. So it's going to be these little clusters of people in the world, because if they say goodbye to somebody, that's it. They don't love them anymore and they're not loved anymore. That's crazy. But when we think that we can't continue loving when we're in separation, we're conceding that that's the only thing we can really do to keep love relationships going. And that's bonkers.
There's so much there that you've already said. And I know Pete's been making notes and I've been thinking and making notes. And
my head's gone off in loads of different directions.
But it's all simple.
I mean, the first thing that I was going to say that you mentioned, which was something I was going to ask, because you mentioned the 5 stages of death and then how that got kind of changed to the 5 stages of grief. Because I made some notes earlier when I was doing a bit of research. So it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And like you said, I was thinking, well, how's, like you said, denial or bargaining ties into to grief? Because like you say, it's, you can understand anger, you can understand depression, you can understand acceptance, but like you say, that was just something that just became kind of changed its name almost over too.
I think people weren't looking at the experiences that these things were being foisted upon as a way of, all right, let's just do the 5. You got somebody who's got, from a fairly reliable physician, a diagnosis of cancer. And on my reading of the data that we have here and so on, you've got maybe 6 months to a year to live. And what do you do if you're in there early going? It's reasonable for some people to say, I think he's got it wrong. I can just put it out of mind. All right. And then you get some more diagnosis and more tests done. and you start disputing with the doctor. You're sure you got that? So if you have a count of 87, does that mean this? Does that mean that? And you can dispute it. The bottom line of what's going on here, I'll put this line in. This is how egos work with things in the world. Egos are the practical part of us, the problem solving and addressing parts of us, the develop skills so you can get things done and get them done well and be proud of what you've done, or take care of it and solve the problem and get past it kind of aspects of ourselves. Well, death and dying and grief and loss aren't problems. Illnesses can be treated as problems for a while unless they turn out to be fatal and so on. So you're in this situation where you're used to addressing everything that comes your way that's problematic with your ego, and you've trained yourself with all kinds of physical skills and emotional skills and so on. So, God, they told me I'm dying. I'm just going to put that out of mind, or I'm going to not believe them. I think they don't know what they're doing in this case. You can do that. And you get hit with more of this stuff, and you get angry. Egos are really good at controlling things with anger, and lots of times anger can prevail in dealing with challenges in living. If it's something that can't really be controlled, the anger is not going to be prevail. It's not going to prevail. So some people then move into what they call bargaining. Kubler-Ross called it that, and that's where you found out in life sometimes if you do something that's positive for some other people, if you're kind to the doctors, if maybe I pay them a little bit more, they're going to do extra tests or whatever, you kind of bargain your way into a place where you can live with what they say is happening. And then what does depression look like? Oh crap, none of these things that I usually do with my ego work. I'm getting worse, and I'm spending my time in a hospital bed now. All right, and then you get to something that they call acceptance, and this is exactly what they mean by acceptance. This is real. I've been trying to pretend that it isn't. This is real. And some people who speak, I think, quite foolishly, but they're recognized as experts in this in the field, say, and when you get to acceptance, you finished with coming to terms with dying. You're done. Finally, you let yourself believe that reality is what it is. But notice that they're not telling you anything about how do I live with this reality. All right. So these 5 stages of dying are plausible. All right, your best friend has just been killed in a car accident. Do you try denial? Does anybody try to pretend that that body that's down there where we're going to have the ceremony this weekend is not really there, or he's going to come back to life? Very few people do that when they're grieving. They will express some anger, but not with expectation that it's going to change reality. You're just pissed off because this happened and it really hurts. Bargaining, what could you possibly do to change the reality? Sure, you can be depressed, but not necessarily because your ego defenses aren't working. You're depressed because it's hard and it makes you sad. So those 5 just don't fit. Something else is going on. And I've been one of the pioneers pushing people to work on describing and understanding what else is going on and what kind of changes are you dealing with here where your ego really doesn't work very well. And I think you wind up thinking, as I have through the years, that there's more to us than egos controlling bits of the world. We have a part of us that cares and cares deeply, sometimes loves, friends, family members, children, life companions, and so on. And there's parts of us that want to build connections with other people, within a community, within a family, and so on. I call that our soul. Think of soul music and soul food. I mean, soul food is the stuff you eat with your friends and your family your entire life. God, there's nothing like those mashed potatoes. There's nothing like that holiday roast. There's nothing like the cold brew that you drink together with friends, and so on. There's another part of us that engages with change, and I call that our spirit. And we struggle to overcome stuff that's really difficult. We struggle to grow and change into better people, better friends, better lovers, better parents. We struggle to develop new life skills, to be better persons. I mean, your podcast has to be about this a lot. Spirits rising above the rotten and aspiring to the better, change for the good, change for yourself, change for your community, change for your team, change for, and so on. So part of what I've done is look at the 5 stages and just let that all fall by the wayside and talk seriously about what people experience. And they have very difficult, weighty experiences that come into their lives that weigh them down. I've got a book called Catching Your Breath in Grief. And when you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, and a lot of people will tell you, I can hardly move. I can hardly breathe. I mean, I feel like I'm suffocating. I feel like somebody just put a huge weight on my shoulders and I can barely stand. And the guy says, okay, you got a weekend off, or we'll give you a week off and then come back to work 2 weeks from now. I mean, one of the things, I don't know the audience for your podcast, but I have a feeling that there are a lot of men finding their way in the full range of their lives, where they're sometimes up against people who have unrealistic expectations of them. And especially this occurs when people are grieving. And they say, well, do the 3-day deal where you have the funeral and so on, and we'll see you on Monday. No, 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 no. My whole world just changed in a major way. Give me a break. I think I can maybe be back in a week or 10 days, but I'm not going to be able to go full throttle. Be patient. I'll come back. I'll be strong again and so on. But I'd appreciate some support and some help rather than the old expectations, because I'm in a different place. And I have a feeling I'm becoming a different person. Boy, do I encourage you to support people in helping workplaces become more realistic in what they expect of teachers and engineers and truck drivers and barkeeps and waiters and waitresses and so on in the world. And your listeners, there are a lot of them right now doing what you're doing. Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway, I kind of summing things up in a certain way. I think grief's got a bad rap because it's thought of as the bad stuff that comes over you, the reactions that you experience, and they're heavy. And it's in the responding that you can do wonderful things, including learning how to continue loving the person who happens not to be with you permanently now, as opposed to temporarily. But I sometimes, suppose I had caught you on a day when you got all of your listeners or followers to come in a big auditorium and we're talking together. And I asked them about loving other people. And there's a big crowd here. Did you bring all your friends? Did you bring all of your family members with you? No. Did you stop loving them? No. Did they stop loving you? No. Okay, then you can love in separation. Let's think about something else, crowd. Um, how many of you think that when someone dies, um, who have loved us, um, we stop loving them? Raise your hand if you stop loving people when they die. Anybody in here? Nobody raises their hand. Do you think they were stopping loving you as they were dying? No. How many of you realize that? How many of you think you will ever stop loving your father, your mother, your grandmother, your best friend who died, or your child who died? How many of you think, oh yeah, I'm going to stop that? Anybody? Nobody. Are you going to stop missing them? No. All right, so let's think. In grieving, do you think you're going to continue loving? Yes. Are you going to continue missing them? Yes. Do those seem like the central themes in grieving? Yes. What do you think of people who walk around on the face of the earth with you who say that what you have to do when you're grieving is stop loving? Do you think you could even do it if you wanted to? Do you think you're going to stop missing? Because a lot of them recommended you do that. Sigmund Freud recommended this. Success in grieving is letting go entirely. And this has dominated thinking among psychologists and especially psychiatrists for decades, probably up into the 70s and early 80s. There were still people who thought that way. I'm a trained philosopher. Philosophers look at how people are thinking of things and now and again wonder about whether it's an apt way to think. And that's not a good way to think. I've never met a seriously grieving person, whether it's been like 3 weeks or 3 years, who has stopped missing the person who died. So there's going to be pain, and who has stopped loving them. So if you wanted to have a crowd get a conversation going about loving in separation, you could ask today, just among us, but the crowd's here, how do we love them when we're not with them? Remembering them is a way to do that. Talking about them to bring those memories to the surface we do that all the time. Do we sometimes laugh when we remember them? Do we sometimes cry when we remember them? Do we sometimes feel grateful to them for how they've made us who we are in part, or for little lessons that they taught us, or the best little story that when I tell that story, everybody smiles, and it's like everybody's smiling with my dad when I tell that story, and I just love that. Do we appreciate what we've been taught? Do we appreciate how we became different because they were in our life? We can do all of this after they've died. So all the stuff we do about remaining connected when we're separated and people are alive in our lives, we can do. It's not hard. It's not a new set of lessons you have to learn about how to love somebody after they've died. We know how to do it. We do it every day. Except
what is the Thomas, this may seem like a stupid question, but I'm just gonna ask it. So what is grief? When we grieve, is it the fact that we're not, we're permanently separated from that person? We know we're physically not going to see them again.
That's surely part of it. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just trying to think. Maybe I'm trying to be too practical with it, and it's something that's not, it's emotive, it's emotional, and everything else. But I'm just thinking, and there's, like you say, that the reactions to grief is often. I'm sure people wouldn't say this out loud to me, but pull your socks up. Time's a great healer. All these kind of things that people kind of, and certainly that may even be, if someone goes through say, a divorce or something like that, where you've not actually lost someone through death, but you've had a change of life. Like you said, your world has changed in a
There's
similar
grieving,
way, I suppose. Yeah, there's grieving involved there as well.
Grief, uh, what do I want to say about grief? Um, I think people aren't careful about some of the things that they don't keep separate in what they understand. Bereavement is the experience of deprivation when someone dies. If you look up the word, it has to do with things being pulled away from you. And it's loss, period. Grieving is how we process in all dimensions of our life the losses that come into them. And when it's a loss of another person having died, that's the kind of grieving that people who write about grief tend to focus on. And the uniqueness of it is there's a dead body. A life has entirely ended. And there's a uniqueness to that. And it's not like mourning when your favorite basketball team loses by a couple of points in the finals. I mean, there's a loss that remains with you. There's a permanent difference that has been made, and then you have to come to terms with it. And traditional poetry and traditional thinking for a long time, what highlighted especially by Freud, reads grieving almost entirely in terms of reaction, because what comes over you typically is much larger than you expected it was going to be. I mean, the shape of your daily life is going to have to be changed somewhere along the way. And the chapters that you're going to be living next in your life cannot be what you expected them to be. And you spend your whole time growing up learning how to live. And as you learn how to live things and with things, you establish habits and patterns, and you move into a place where you take things for granted. And one of the things that happens in loss and grief is something you took for granted can be taken for granted no more. But a successful living of a human life involves a lot of developing habits that work, developing dispositions that will sustain you, that you can sort of do on automatic. And when you experience the death of someone you love, so much of the automatic is just gone. Fortunately, we are the kinds of creatures who can move into new life patterns. I mean, we have, as we've grown into life, established things that get to be pretty well established, but we also learn how to change when change is required. That's one of the things we come to understand. Well, this is a change that's bigger scale and more complex, all built into one. It's not just a physical change or an emotional change or a social change or a spiritual change. It's all of them all at once. Those are big changes to take on, and we're not so used to doing that. So grief, bereavement is experienced as a monumental change, not a little one. And grieving has to be multifaceted and take a lot of time when you're reshaping as much as you have to reshape. And just thinking of grieving as the pain that you experience, you can get stuck there and you can get stopped there. And people need help in thinking of other things to do besides feeling sorry for yourself and stopping. Lots of ways of doing that. Typically, there isn't just one person in your life who's died. A lot of members of grieving families and so on can find themselves sort of forgotten by some of the other members of the family because they're focused on this person who's died. But if you think about and invite people to think about Charlie died, what would he want? Nobody answers, oh, he'd want me to suffer for the rest of my life. He'd want me to just fall apart. All those things he taught me and so on, he'd want me to forget. And he'd want me to just wallow in misery. Nobody ever says that. They say, well, look, I know you're going to hurt. And I know it's going to be hard in some ways that I'm not having you around. But please know, I want you to do well. I don't want you to forget me, and I don't think you have to. I'd like to think that some of these stories we used to tell one another, things we did together, things we learned together, ways we laughed together, and so I want you to carry them with you. I don't want you to be preoccupied with me. You never were when I was alive. Why would you do it now? Remember, you have children, or we had children together. I'd really like you to continue to take care of them well. And love the people that we've loved and love the things that we've done and so on. And now and again, say to yourself, I wish Charlie was here. We'd really have a good time. We used to have a good time, God, and then you start telling some of the good stories. But, don't focus your whole life on me. But it's hard not to when you're caught up in the pain of missing this person. And people you would hope would speak to you stop speaking to you because they're afraid of making you upset. They can't make you more upset than you are already. All right. And I was just talking the other day, I was doing a similar kind of a conversation like this. And I remember when I first started teaching, people would say, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. So I kind of avoid them or I don't say anything. And I said, couldn't you say something like, I don't know what to say to you. I know you're hurting, and I'd like to be with you if I'm welcome here. That's not hard. All right. And that is exactly what you're feeling. And it says, I care about you. And boy, people need that. This is a pair of stories I've been telling lately. From the early days, I met these couples who both had the unfortunate experience of having a young child die. And Helen and Roger came to speak to my classes several times. And they had a 3-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy. And Mary, the 3-year-old girl, fell off a swing on a Friday in the backyard. And she was taken to the hospital because she hit pretty hard. And by Monday, Mary was dead. And it turned out that she was on her way to developing a pretty serious illness in her brain, and the fall accelerated the process. And by Monday, she was dead. So she remembered two experiences, among others, in her speaking to my classes. The first was her encounter with her minister when she went to the church for the funeral. And she's going up the steps, and there he is at the door, and he reaches out his hand, and he shakes his hand, and what unlikely thing did he say to her? Congratulations. What? She said, congratulations, you have an angel in heaven. She said, if I could have mustered the strength, I would have clocked him right on the spot, but I just swallowed hard and went into the church. It wasn't the best funeral experience I've ever had, she said. Later in the week, she's at home, and she gets a phone call from a neighbor down the block. And her daughter had been playing with this neighbor's daughter for a few months as 3-year-olds and having a really good time. And the woman said, we never really connected, you and I, because we were both very busy in one way or another. But I have a feeling you're hurting pretty badly. I have photographs of our 2 daughters playing. if you would like to see those photos, I'd be glad to look through them together with you. Can you come for a cup of tea or coffee? She came. They enjoyed their daughters enjoying themselves together, and so on. Simple as that. Don't congratulate people on having dead relatives. It's not a good idea. And share some of their life with them. Share some of the experience you have had with the person who died. And most people can think of some such thing, and that's a good thing to share. Ask if they would like to hear a little story or not, and if they're not ready for it or don't, later would be fine. Today I'm rotten today. So, but thanks for the offer, and I'll take you up on it. Let's maybe next time we'll get together in some way. Hope some of this is helpful.
This is, yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, do you find that? I mean, you mentioned faith a little bit there. I was going to ask, do people having a faith, does that affect their grief or help them process things differently or frame death differently? Do you know what I mean? In all your experience that you've had, do you know what I mean? It's just kind of, I just wondered because you mentioned that the bad the kind of the bad dealing of it by the
I did.
minister there. But I mean, I just wondered, yeah.
We're talking faith here. I think we're spiritual beings. And I think as spiritual beings, we seek meaning in living in two ways. We seek meaning as understanding, and the teachings in various religious or spiritual faiths are intended to support that search. And some faiths can really do the job and help people orient themselves to this is how the world works, this is where I fit in it, this is why I have come to be where I am. And these are important lessons for living well as opposed to getting hammered and not knowing what to do in a life without a faith. Some fit into traditions that have been with us for thousands of years, and some are the corner witch doctor who's figured something out that sells well and could also be supportive in some way or another. You don't know until you explore it and think about it, and so on. The other way of finding meaning is in finding reasons for living, things that you can do or experience that make it so you would say to yourself, I'm sure glad I'm alive for this. I'm sure glad I'm able to do this. It's a privilege to be the kind of being that is able to do what I can do with my voice, with my hands, with my arms and legs, with my mind, and so on. And I think that lots of faith traditions also teach practices that people come to do faithfully, that remind them of the soul and spirit within them that enables them to do the things that they find most meaningful. And some people participate in rituals, some people participate in kind of regularized practices of being reminded of being prayerful, of being peaceful, of being generous, of being charitable, and so on. And the world's faiths are full of wonderful supports, and unfortunately, they're full of histories of failing to be living up to the supports that are inherent in their faith and making life worse as opposed to better. And I've just been thinking lately, in the US, I think people in other countries around the world have heard that we're living through a kind of a shadowy time where some of the aspirations of the people of the United States from its founding have been set aside in exchange for um, power and control and accumulation as life aspirations. Uh, and human beings in general, I think, I sit down every once in a while with some of my friends, and sometimes we're just marveling at what human beings can do and how spectacularly wonderful they can be, and generous and life supporting and hope lifting and love spreading kinds of beings. And then they can be so horribly disappointing. And we're living through a time now where horrible disappointment is coming to be a way of life in the country south of us, where I was born and raised. I don't know if you've noticed, maybe not,
Yeah, yeah,
maybe you haven't picked it up, but
yeah. No, no. And I was going to ask just one more thing, really, before we kind of wrap up. Was you? I don't know how old you are, Thomas, but you've from an early age, like you said, from maybe 6 or 7, were your first memories
yes,
of death and grief and being introduced to those kind of concepts. And
yeah.
as you've studied grief for decades, you've lived life for decades, and you've obviously been physically touched by death throughout your life. Does
Only 30 aunts and uncles have been buried. That's all.
okay. Do you does grieving get easier? And the reason I ask is because you said about not coping strategies or habits, but
Mm,
you mentioned the response that the response and the way you respond to death
mm,
and grieving at your age now. I mean, there's the classic thing, isn't there, that we people sort of Pete's age and myself, we're both around the 50 mark. You kind of hit
mhm.
an age in your life where you start going to more funerals than you do weddings. There's the period where you're always going to weddings, and then the weddings stop, and then the funerals start. What's
Or you
that?
do what my dad used to do at funerals when they go, "We'll see you at the next one." You go, "Unless it's mine." In the house.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah,
I'm edging in that direction. Does it get easier?
so have you got better at grieving, or does grieving get easier, or does losing people get easier the more you do it?
I think I would say this. Bereavement does not get easier. It's always a deprivation when it is. Um, do I have some ideas about what behaviors, expressions, and so on I might turn to, where I expect that things will go as well as they can on a kind of a recovery scale and so on. And I have to say, I believe so. I don't allow myself to get just stuck in um, expressing myself. That's another point that's worth making about emotions. I think in our culture, um, there's a lot of thinking of emotions as different from physical pains. If you have a physical pain, um, your body's telling you something. And often those pains just go away quickly because you bumped yourself and the bruise is healing. But sometimes you've chipped or broken a bone in your knee. You haven't just bumped it. And the pain tends to get worse when there's something seriously wrong, and your body is made to tell you, pay attention to this, learn more about it, find out what's causing it, and address it with others' help if you need. Uh, I think that emotions are not just something that you have to express and make it go away by expressing it. If you're in pain, um, yell, didn't do it. Yell louder, didn't do it. Really yell, I mean, yell your guts out and so on. That's the way people treat emotions. Just pour them out, pour them onto other people around you, and so on. What if we thought of our emotions as sort of like a psychological um, pain system? It's like your body gives you signals of things to pay attention to, Your emotions give you signals of things to pay attention to. And I think you can get better at that. You can't eliminate the things you have to pay attention to when they arise, but you can know that it's not going to end if you just yell louder or cry longer. What's the crying about? What can you do about what the crying's about? Well, you can't end the bereavement, so don't stop trying to do that because it's not going to help. You can pay more attention to the things you loved about the guy who died. You can look for life lessons in the person's life. You can a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And my little book that got us together in the first place, this thing's called Seeking Wisdom in Death's Shadows, tells the story, among other things, of how I turned to grief and loss as an area of interest, and how I've engaged with and written books and articles and so on. There are 23 items in this collection. 14 were published previously, but in academic journals where no one will ever find them. So I put them in here. And I wrote 9 new things in here. And in part, there's an early one about how I turned to this kind of work. And the end is, if I'm seeking wisdom and I'm kind of recounting my history of writing about it and revising and improving and so on, at the end of it all, in the last part, there are 3 pieces. One is called A Dozen Good Things About Grieving. One is more of a philosophical thing, kind of summing up on branches of philosophy, taking a look at death and dying, probably not for your average reader, but for some. And at the end, it's, all right, you've been writing about harvesting wisdom for living a mortal life. What's some of the best stuff you've come up with? Learn from others. You didn't have to come up with it yourself. And I can tell you in summary form just about one of those. It'll only take a half an hour or 45 minutes, so bear with me. Early on, I was invited by a dormitory on campus to come and give what they call a last lecture. What would you say if you had one last chance to talk about something that matters to you having to do with your teaching, and you would never be able to talk again about that subject? And I thought, boy, this is challenging. They invited 3 of us to do that. The woman who went ahead of me was in the communications department, and she spent her last lecture, this is her lifetime last talk that she's imagining, talking about television commercials. And I thought that was kind of thin soup for life, but I think maybe she misunderstood the assignment. Anyway, I had been collecting cartoons and quotations and so on in relation to my teaching, and just put them in a shoebox. I thought, I'll get those out and see if I can piece something together. And I put together a talk that I called Fragile Humanity, Handle with Care. And I talked about 4 questions about the reality we live in. I would call them 4 mysteries. These are constants in life that you can't control like your ego does. Your soul and spirit engages with them, and whereas in problem solving you change something in the world, when you engage with mysteries, they change you. Love does that. Death does that. Being impermanent and so on. Anyway, I focused on 4 mysteries, 4 constants in life, and I asked this simple question for each of them. Is it okay to be finite, impermanent? Because we all are. Is it okay to be small and insignificant? Just think of the universe. How big are we, actually? All right. Is suffering okay? And there's a mystery we don't get to control, right? is not knowing, being uncertain. Okay. And the audience is there, and the first time, yeah, those students are just looking like, what? I said, why would these questions be important? And I said, and this is what I say to you to kind of top off this bit of the conversation. If you spend your life trying to say no to any of those four things, you're saying you don't approve of yourself. You don't approve of the life you have available to you. You don't value it. You find yourself threatened by it. You just as soon not have anything to do with it. That's not a good way to live a life. And I've given this little talk to professional counselors. And I said to those students, I said, if you live your life persisting in saying no to one of those questions, you will wind up in counseling. You will fill counselors' offices. It doesn't work well. And all the counselors in the audience go, yeah, that's right. Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. One by one. And I think it's a real struggle to say it's okay that I'm impermanent, that I don't know everything I want to know, that I'm so small compared to all the forces that are out there affecting me. And the book has stuff like that in it, as well as something you might think of as sort of formal intellectual fare. It's a human book. And I should tell you one more thing, and you're going to feature this in your podcast. I'm going to give you a promotion code for buying the book.
Okay.
I'll be using that.
Yeah, so will I. So will I.
It's an easy code. It's 5 letters and 3 numbers. Is it 3 numbers? I gotta remember that. It's AUFLY 310. I'm pretty sure it's 310. Yeah. There may not be an O. Try to focus. And what you do is you go to Oxford University Press and you go to the page that has the book described for you, and you can read about what all's in the book. And you can see a table of contents and a sample of the writing. And you say, yeah, I want to buy this. And you fill in the title and say, go to checkout. And when you get to checkout, there's a little blank where you can put in that code, AUFLY 31 with a 0 or not, I'm not sure. And you get a 30% off on the book.
Brilliant. No, that's so good. I was going to ask how we get a copy of that. So that is your latest book, isn't it? Seeking Wisdom in Death's Shadows. Yeah.
And it really culminates my whole life of thinking. It's got the mature versions of every topic in it. And it took me a year to put it all together. And that year ended last December. So I'm out doing this kind of stuff. You asked me my age.
But I didn't actually ask. I said I don't know how old you are, but I assume you've been doing this for quite a few decades.
What do you think? I'll be 81 in July.
Wow.
Excellent.
Yeah, fantastic. I wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have said that. No, that is amazing. And
well, the stuff that you tout, I mean, you're telling guys to stay healthy in every dimension of who they are. And when I was 25, I thought I was way overweight and quite sick. I'd been in the hospital, and I came out and I said, Tom, you're not going to be around very long if you keep eating wrong and you don't exercise and take care of your body and so on. And your mind's not going to work as well as it's working now if you let your body fall apart. And so what I sense that you fellows do with your podcast, I endorse the ideas 100%. I hope I've added something to the soup.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I mean, this has been totally unique, a unique conversation. Like we said, this is episode 305. and we've never touched on this before, let alone had a really, fantastic hour talking about it. And like I say, it's something that every single listener, every single watcher will experience, has experienced, and it's one of those it's a universal experience had by all. So thank you just for sharing your life's work with us, Thomas. It's been fantastic. So people go to Oxford University Press and they put in AUFLY 31, possibly with a 0 at the end, possibly not, and then get a 30% discount on your book, Seeking Wisdom in Death's Shadows. Thank you so much, Thomas. That's been brilliant.
Thanks for the privilege.
Brilliant. Thank
Good
you
luck.
so much, everybody, for watching or listening. Please do like, share, subscribe, leave a review if you're watching or listening on a platform that allows you to do so. And especially, I mean, I can think of lots of people that this conversation is going to help, and or is going to be very interesting for. I'm at the stage now at the gym that I run, Thomas, where most of my members are in their 50s, 60s, 70s. Lots of people are losing their parents, at that kind of age, so we're kind of people who are experiencing death, all the time that I work with. So I think this is really an important subject that hopefully people take a lot from. So yeah, thank you so much.
Let me say just one more thing to you. You can cut all kinds of stuff out of your tapes. I know what you do. Feel free to give that promotion code to people you work with or where you're helping them with taking care of themselves and so on. I asked Oxford once about, they said, give it to your professional colleagues and give it to your friends. And I told them eventually that I was starting to do podcasts. Spread it to the people through the podcasts. Give it to people who you think it would benefit in some way to at least consider. And, spread it around.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No.
It's tempting to tell you to leave it on shelves someplace.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's been really, really great. And like I say, totally different. And it's an absolute pleasure to speak to you. And I'm very, very jealous of you being there on Vancouver Island. And that's so gorgeous up there in that part of the world.
Could you give me your email?
Yeah, what we'll do, we'll pass that to you afterwards. I'll get Pete to message.
Yeah.
Pete will do that afterwards. Yeah, we'll definitely connect because that's fantastic. We'll do that in a second.
I can give you my email if for any reason.
We'll get that because then once this podcast goes out in a few weeks, we'll share it all with you. So that'll be brilliant. Thank you, brilliant, everybody. We will see you next week for episode 306. That's been interesting, very interesting. Did you enjoy that, Pete?
My head's just about to explode. I've got loads of stuff written down that I wanted to say, but I've already changed my mind on some of it from listening. No, because it's just like the whole bereavement grief thing was great because it's like, you can kind of try to work out how to deal with everything, but the bereavement thing is like, it's final. This thing is final. So that's, I need to think about that.
Well, what we'll probably do, Thomas, if it's okay with you, we'll both get the book, we'll both read it, and then we'll maybe get you back on again in a couple of months, and we'll talk about it having read the book again, because I get the feeling that we could talk about this again, which would be fantastic. Yeah.
Well, probably even in my head, we're going to do an episode on it with just me and James having a chat about it to try and figure it all out as well. So honestly, I've loved it. I've absolutely loved that. It's given me a lot to think about. Thank you.
Brilliant. Guys, we will see you next week for episode 306. Until then, bye-bye.
You've been listening to Health Odyssey with Peter Lant and James St. Pierre. To get your regular fix of hype-free health, you can subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can find out more on today's and other topics at healthodyssey.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching for Health Odyssey.